I'm interested in people truly understanding the laws that we're trying to pass. Because being out there and talking to people, they usually only know the one or two talking points that you hear on the news, and that's all they can actually say about it. And then when you press them about it, or say, why do you believe in this, or why are you against this bill, they only have those 2 points. So a lot of people started to vote against their best interest because they don't know what the bill does.
And if we were voting on the Iran War Powers resolution, and it's down to the people of Florida 11 cast the tie-breaking vote as a direct democracy, everybody else in the country would be saying, well, wait a minute, why do they have that power and I don't?
A lot of elected officials and the American people generally, 2 years ago, were not even thinking about Iran as being a major threat to the U.S. What issues do you think 2 years or 3 years from now are going to be major threats to the United States? Hello, everyone. Welcome to On the Fringe. This is Dave. I'm here with Gavin.
Hi.
And we are back with Ramon Perez, the executive director of the Digital Democracy Project. And we have another special guest today. So we are going to be talking to Ramon and Dan Williams. Dan is running for the District 11 Democratic primary election that's coming up this Tuesday in Florida. He is currently running with a bunch of other candidates. It's an open seat. Representative Daniel Webster is retiring. It's open season in District 11. And Dan has qualified for the position by petition, so he is not backed by any major special interest groups. The people in District 11 have wanted Dan's name on the ballot. He has a very interesting background in engineering and tech. He worked for Disney for a very long time. He's also a professor at Full Sail University. And I'd like to just kick this off really quick and say, so Dan, what motivated you to get off the bench and throw your hat in the ring in this election?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi, everybody. My name is Dan Williams. What got me into the race for CD11 is I felt like we didn't have a voice up in the government. So as soon as Trump got reelected, I started trying to reach out to my elected officials with ideas about what we could do and kind of more suggestions. And I found quickly that if you're not in their district, then you can't actually email any of the other representatives. And so me personally, I live in District 11, which had Daniel Webster in that seat. And so he's a Republican. So then I was like, okay, what could be my next step? And then I wanted to reach out to the senators, but both of them are Republican. And then I started casting a wider net about how about I just kind of contact every Democrat inside of the House of Representatives. And of that whole entire list, you can only contact 4 of them because the other ones have a geo lock on it, where if you're not in their zip code, they won't even send the email. Out of the 4 people, 3 people responded with, oops, sorry, you're not in my district, but thank you anyway. And the other one just never responded. So I wanted a different way about how people, even living in a red district or with all red representatives, could still have their voice being heard. So I started brainstorming on this. Being an engineer, I'm a problem solver by nature. And so I started coming up with the idea for direct democracy. And I started building the back end of it, because right now I teach computer programming for mobile apps and websites over at Full Sail University. And I've been doing that for about a decade now. And so I just jumped in and started building the back database of it and starting to do some of the front end work about what it would look like. And I originally called my platform Ask America. And so I went and put together a video saying, hey, are people interested in this? And is this a good idea? And as soon as I did it, one of my competitors at the time, Barbie Hardin Hall, actually said, this is not a new idea, and tagged the Digital Democracy Project. But I already had known who they were because I did my research. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I love what they're doing, but I never thought they would be willing to work with me instead of vice versa. And so they actually reached out to me then and said, hey, we're really interested in what you're doing. Partner with us and use our platform. And I was like, absolutely. And then the more I learned about the Digital Democracy Project, the more I thought it was a perfect choice, because they are a secure system with the Votes app. So that's our military uses for our military members to vote overseas. So that's already like military level encryption, and they have the whole platform done, and it works wonderfully. And so how it works is candidates can actually endorse the Digital Democracy Project instead of vice versa. So any candidate out there can actually partner with them and do this same thing. And I'm hoping that I'm going to kind of lead the way in it to show that direct democracy works. And then we'll be more than happy to train anybody else that kind of comes through. And hopefully we can start changing how Congress works at a fundamental level up in DC.
So that was the impetus that got you involved. As you've been involved in this process, and again, the primary's on Tuesday, I imagine you've been through quite a bit already. how has your view or sort of how you think about direct democracy, the concept of direct democracy, both in terms of theory and practice,
Mhm.
how has that changed or how has that evolved? And I guess a question I have is how do you see that changing maybe in America going forward?
Yeah. So my initial theory was that people could actually vote and then my vote would always go with the majority. And then I started actually getting out there and talking to people and actually
Mm,
people love this idea. Like across the spectrum, it doesn't matter the party affiliation or lack of party affiliation, but
mm,
people really want a direct voice. And I have been out in very Republican places like flea markets down in Webster, Florida. I've been to the villages, and everyone that you talk to still feels like disenfranchised. And this idea
mm,
of it is starting to get people more interested because they're like, wait, I can actually have a direct control about what happens in DC. And I'm like, that's exactly correct. And the other kind of big thing that the Digital Democracy Project kind of needs is a way for people to understand the bills. And that's where the candidates can
mm,
kind of come in. So one of my pledges that I figured out way when I first started is that for each and every major bill that we try to pass in DC, I'll make an educational video that helps explain that law. So exactly what happens if we vote yes and no using only facts instead of any kind of political party messaging. Because I'm interested in people truly understanding the laws that we're trying to pass. Because being out there and talking to people, they usually only know the one or two talking points that you hear on the news, and that's all they can actually say about it. And then when you press them about it or say, why do you believe in this or why are you against this bill? They only have those 2 points. So a lot of
mm.
people started to vote against their best interest because they don't know what the bill does. And I think that's kind of one of the things that is the main problem with what's going on in DC and why so many people feel disenfranchised is that it's too complex for a normal individual to actually understand. And so what I'm kind of making sure is going to happen is I'm using my educational background where I take complex topics and simplify them down for my students, and I'm just shifting that over to politics. So I'll take these big, gigantic bills, break them down into easy, understandable, small chunks, and then make sure that
Mm.
people have all the information before using the Digital Democracy Project voting tools. And then we now have an educated public. And that's going to be a huge game changer. At the end of that video, though, I will give my opinion, but it will be clearly labeled as opinion about what I think is best for our district. But my ultimate vote up in DC will always go with the majority.
So,
I mean, that's a big promise. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Dave.
as I say, so with that, where does DDP, the Digital Democracy Project, fit in with connecting and then educating those voters?
Yeah. So luckily, they have a whole bunch of tools on their website as well. So they actually connect to other kind of different
Mm,
sites that help explain it. But Ramon actually could probably speak about this a little bit more, but he actually has a background in AI. And so he developed VoteBot, which actually allows people to ask really hyper specific questions about these bills that them personally kind of has stake in. And then what it does uses the text of the bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ramon, and then to answer that question, and then a second layer of AI to help make sure that that is factually correct. And that's going to be huge in itself because people can say, hey, I make $70,000 a year. I live here and I have 2 kids. Does this bill affect me? And then we can actually get live feedback back for that. And Ramon, is that true before going
Yeah,
forward?
you're spot on. I was just
Okay.
thinking I could probably take a nap because you're doing such a great job. I don't even need to. I don't even need to explain. No,
You and me both.
exactly. Yeah, we just as Dan said, I'll give a high level because not all of your listeners may have heard my first conversation with you guys. We
mm,
use mobile voting technology. It's the same, as Dan said, as what military voters are using to vote on their phones while they're in austere deployed locations where it's difficult to get an absentee ballot through the mail. It's built by a company called Votes, which is VOATZ. It's built on a blockchain and it uses pretty sophisticated encryption technology to make sure that there's a secret ballot. So you have to have very high confidence that this person is a real human being. It does a selfie scan and a photo ID check. It finds you on the voter file for your respective district. So it knows you're a US citizen, it knows you're a resident of the state. And then it has to also encrypt and protect your secret ballot. So that's one of the things about mobile voting that's quite challenging. You must know who the
mm,
person is, but you cannot know how they voted. So Votes has, I think, cracked the code on this. They've done 150 elections using this software. The Canadians are going even further. In Ontario, something like 55 cities are going to let people vote by phone in October in the municipal elections. So it's exciting to see the technology develop. But as he mentioned, we also combine that with using AI to rapidly read and summarize legislation and try to explain it in very plain language, because the bills themselves are written by lawyers for other lawyers. Everything is couched in this very esoteric legal language. Even understanding how your legislator voted is really tough to do. So we scrape all the content from the congressional website as well as state legislative websites. And then we go through a series of checks to figure out which motion on which procedure on which committee hearing it was, actually means that this bill was voted on a straight up or down vote on the floor of Congress or of the state legislature. So we're trying to sift through this mountain of noise and try to make it clear to people, this is what the bill does in plain language. You can talk to VoteBot and get any level of specifics, because VoteBot, we feed the entire legislative text into its knowledge base. So it's much more specific than ChatGPT or Perplexity. So you can educate yourself on the bill. We also provide tools to let you see how other organizations have taken a position on a bill. So basically scanning the internet for finding out that, the League of Women Voters supports this piece of legislation, or the Chamber of Commerce opposes it, or whatever, and put that on the site, so that we want people to feel as informed as possible before they decide if they want to support that bill or not. And then when they support that bill or don't, the aggregated votes are taken off of the blockchain and put onto maps that are updated basically every hour, that show a legislator what their district wants, so that the legislator can say, well, we know that these people have been verified, they are on the voter file, they're real human beings, and they've taken a position on this bill. So somebody like Dan, who's in Congress, can actually say, I know what my people want me to do, and then I can go vote accordingly. That's how we make the system work. Now, we don't endorse candidates or politicians. We provide this platform, and we're going to hold Dan or anybody else accountable using the exact same tools, because what we also do is compare what did the voters want in the app to what did Dan do on the floor of Congress, and did they match? And how often did they match, and how often did they diverge? Now, Dan, who's running on a direct democracy platform, should have a 100% scorecard, but
not should, will.
He would be scored regardless, even if he likes us and he's friendly with us. He's going to get a scorecard, because the data is the data. We don't have a say in that process. We simply take what the people wanted in the app, we compare it to how the legislator voted on the floor, and every legislator gets a scorecard. We produce about 1,500 of these now for the 535 members of Congress, and then the 7 different state legislatures where we're active. And our goal is to have all 50 states, and eventually get to the point where we can do cities and counties and school boards as well.
One kind of thing I would like to add for that is, I think it's really important to have that knowledge about how your voter base actually wants you to vote. Because a lot of politicians say, I have a mandate from my people about a certain topic. And we're like, prove it. And they just can't do it right now. But if we have a clear voting record, then we can actually say that we do have a mandate, and we can point to that.
Right. So along those same lines, what if you have voters in your district that either don't have access or don't trust the Digital Democracy Project's tools? How would you reach out and make sure that their voices are heard as well?
Yeah, so one of my things, or one of my plans of attack, is once I actually get the seat, is we have offices in our district, and we usually have like 2 or 3. And in those offices, I'll actually have computer labs. So people can come in if they're not comfortable with it. And then I've already talked to some of my fellow instructors that said that they would be willing to kind of come in and teach these kind of classes. And so everybody that works in my office will be able to teach people about how to use this platform. And I think once people can see it and they actually learn about the Digital Democracy Project and how secure votes is, I think that that's going to be kind of the best way to get past that. Also, I will be working on trying to figure out better ways or different ways for people to kind of still make sure that they get their votes. Because right now, how people do it is they can either call their representative on the phone or they can send them an email. But all that does is get tracked. And then in a system, I think it's called QI is the most popular one. And what happens, though, is that information is never shown to the public. And it's not actually able to be FOIA requested, so a Freedom of Information Act. Because what happens is anything in Congress is always going to be separate than that. And so one of my things is, no matter what I use, all my information and all my data will be public, because I'm interested in transparency in government on all levels, and I want to make sure that people are held accountable. I actually would like to try to make laws to make sure that Congress is not exempt from the FOIA requests. Because if people actually knew how their person should vote or how their community feels, I think we'd see a lot more people coming together on different issues. Because one of my slides in my deck when I'm presenting, it always says policies are greater than parties. Because policies tend to unite people, where parties tend to divide people by their very nature. And so if you can talk to people, let's say about affordability, everybody right now is on the same page with affordability across the board, right? And so why are we not changing that up in the government? It's because the people up there aren't persuaded to actually do anything about it. And so if we can kind of show that all of America is for a different issue, then that should be reflected up in DC.
Sort of riffing off of that, I mean, there's so much good stuff there, but so I'm a little biased because I'm an educator too, so it's always nice to see educators getting involved in politics. One of the things that I find interesting is we're talking about educating the public, giving them more information, giving them more access, giving them more transparency. Isn't one of the issues not necessarily that the voters are underinformed, but this is something we discussed with Ramon previously, that the legislators themselves don't really understand the legislation that's being passed
Yes.
or that
So
they're
glad you brought this
debating.
up. Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
that seems like an issue to me.
100%. And so that comes across from a couple different ways, right? My first thing that I would like to point out is that we need more tech people in Congress in general, all right? Because if you look at how the House of Representatives is currently made up, out of the 435 members, there are 25 with a background in education, just starting there, right? And if you want to go to the technical level, there are 9 engineering people, but mostly civil engineering. And if you actually want like computer people that understand code and any kind of technology, then you're talking about 5 people of the 435 members of the House that are trying to regulate against data centers, data privacy laws, cryptocurrency and stable coins. And they just are really overwhelmed. And the people that are not technical, when you can kind of always tell that in the different hearings. I always point to the TikTok hearings, in case you guys have ever seen those, where people ask so simplistic questions and then they get back an answer, but they don't understand the answer. And so they can't process it and ask a better question next. And so that's why we need to start making sure that we get more of a variety of people up there in Congress. Because right now, there's 165 political science people out of the 435 members, 75 business people, and we have about 60 lawyers up there. And so we probably are set with those things, and we need to get more teachers. We need to get more people with actual skills that can help people. Why don't we have more farmers? Because such a big thing about America is always talking about farming, but yet no one is up there actually representing them. And so the cool thing about the platform that I'm talking about is that we can open it up to everyone and have everyone have an equal say. And one of my plans of attack is to have a council that can, of different experts, that can help me make these decisions. So if I have questions about farming, for example, right, I can talk to farmers, get information back in, and then use that information in my educational videos. So I know what I'm good at and what I know, but more importantly, I know what I don't know. And so that is where the experts kind of come into play for it. So any kind of those facts and figures, we'll make sure that we have those experts that help supporting those.
I think some traditional candidates on both parties, either Democrat or Republican, would say this is a very radical idea where you're trying to actually get the local constituents really involved
Yep.
in the electoral process. So have you seen any sort of resistance or felt any resistance in your campaign to this, and how is this affecting you? And how would this affect you to pass legislation if you do make it to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, of course there's going to be pushback because anytime that you have anything new, there's always going to be people that are scared of it. All right. Now, personally, in my district of CD11, we have 40% Republicans, 30% independents, and 30% Democrats, roughly. Right. So one party by itself can never win the seat. So it comes down to the independents in the center that are going to make that decision. But weirdly, in Florida, we have closed primaries. So that independent section in the middle doesn't have a voice right now. And they won't have a voice until the general election, which I'm against because I believe we should have open primaries. But right now we don't. And so the problem is anytime that you're going to kind of change anything in the system, people are going to be wary about it. And one of my examples I always kind of point to is somebody that I was running against told me that I should not be allowed to run as a Democrat because of my platform. And I'm like, but my views are democratic. My platform is very center. But if you think about it, that's how government should be, right? Everybody should have a voice in their respective Republican, Democrat, or independent representative, right? But right now, I don't feel comfortable talking to my Republican representatives because they'll never listen to me. I try, and I just get the boilerplate template back. So nothing really changes. So what I'm trying to tell people is if we actually give people a voice, then the will of the people kind of comes about. Now, people are concerned about groups like MAGA, right? Because they're very vocal. However, the actual true MAGA people that kind of spout the crazy nonsense that we always hear on the news is a very small minority of that party. I've actually been out there and I've been talking to the Republicans, and that's not it, right? General people don't feel that way. And the kind of cool thing about it is there's studies that can actually back this up. So I've actually been endorsed by the American People's Compact, which is a research-based company that studies different topics in policies, and then they only put out things that 80% of Americans agree on. And there's 16 points on there, ranging everything from data centers to equality for all, so LGBT rights, and everything in between. And of course, affordability and all that kind of stuff. And the great thing about that is I can point to that data and say, this is 80% of Americans. And so this is what we will be voting for. Is there anything on this list that you don't like? And everybody agrees with everything on it because 80% of Americans agree on that kind of stuff. And so I get tons of pushback all the time asking me about the security of it. But then luckily we have votes, so we can actually point to how it's going to be secure. And the other kind of a really important thing that we have to kind of consider is who's going to win the primary is the person that's going to be competing in the general election. So who has the capability of swinging those independents to their side? And so personally, I think I have a standout platform that's going to make that happen for people. And I've already been talking to them about it. So I really kind of want to push that more than anything else.
Yeah, I want to add on to that. I think if we were when Dan said policies are greater than parties, I think if we were to let everybody vote on this war with Iran, I think you'd find that the MAGA folks would be one of the most vociferous groups against it. And yet they are in the Republican Party. It was MAGA that forced transparency on the Epstein files.
Right.
And yet they're in the Republican Party. Because I don't think that people actually fit into this left versus right dichotomy. I mean, we've talked about this on your podcast last time, guys, that we're sort of jammed into this two-party system when that's really not the way human beings actually see the world. And I think what Dan is proposing to do, even though it might actually seem radical, it was the original idea of the founders. It's not radical. We've gotten away from the original founding idea because the two political parties are not in the Constitution. In fact, George Washington specifically warned us not to go down into a system with political factions. And so this, what he's proposing is the original idea. It is the modern day Cincinnatus. It is the local citizen who puts down the plow and heads off to Washington to represent his community and be a servant leader for the people that he, in his community. So I actually don't find it radical at all. I think our departure from the constitutional founding is why we find ourselves in the situation we do.
Yeah.
And yet it does. I mean, the thing that I'm sure you've talked about struggling with is it does seem so natural for people that it's not even questioned. It is, it's a departure, certainly, but it's a departure that we've been living in for a while. And I think it's a struggle. And then you were talking about even in the Democratic Party, it's a struggle for people to go, no, we need to bring in people from outside the party. Because as you pointed out, and I think that was a really good point, you can't win if you rely on Democratic voters in
100%.
District 11. It's just not going to happen for you. If you went, I'm only going to look at the Democratic voters in District 11, it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
You have to look at that other 30%.
Yeah. If we elect
And
somebody
even the 40%, perhaps.
Even if we elect somebody that the independents and even some of the right-leaning people don't want, then we're going to lose the seat to the right. And then we're going to have no say up there in Congress again. And then we need to be able to try to open it up to a better idea. I want to get back to a time where we could actually disagree, but still get along with each other. So I was just giving a speech and I asked people in the room, and there's a room full of Democrats, how many people have Republican friends? And a couple people raised their hands. But I'm like, how many people used to have Republican friends? Tons more went up. And I'm like, that says a big thing because the parties are dividing us more and more and more to the fact that we live in two different worlds. That is kind of the news organizations on the right and news organizations on the left. But the problem is, by doing two completely different things, we never come together on anything. Because even if we agree on an issue like the war or the Epstein files, the two news organizations make their money by keeping us apart and keeping us fighting. And so we need to kind of change that at a fundamental level as well. And I want to kind of go back to what Ramon was saying, that this is kind of the original idea. And the reason that it should change now and couldn't before is technology. And I always go back to technology and education because those are my two main platforms. But technology allows us to ask every single person their idea. Before, there would be no way. Even if I took 1 minute to talk to everybody in my district and say, hey, how do you like on this? Or what do you think about this particular thing? There are 800,000 people in my district. That would take too long, right? So before, 250 years ago, we would tell people what our idea was or how we wanted them to vote, put them on a horse, and then they would ride to DC to vote. Nowadays, don't have to do that, right? And we can actually change our ideas on the fly. One of the things that I always kind of point to people is, how many people would have asked their representative what their view on Iran was 2 years ago? Nobody, because it wasn't an issue. And so how do you pick a representative on a future maybe thing that might happen? And that's where I think people kind of start to get, oh, I see what you're doing. Because for every single new issue that comes about, I will be asking my people, and so their opinion is heard. So their opinion isn't heard now in the primaries of the general election, right? Their opinion is heard every single time on every single vote. And I really think giving that power back to the people will do a couple different things. One thing is, I'd like to get more people talking about policies so they actually understand them. Because right now, the government has kind of run amok because no one is keeping track, because everyone is so checked out from politics that they just don't care anymore. So I talk to people all the time. They're like, oh, I'm not interested in that. And I'm like, but you do know what affects you, even if you're voting or not. And people are like affected by what's happening up there. And so I want to make sure that they actually have that voice. Any other questions?
No, that's a lot to chew on, and I've got 2 or 3 questions that I'm thinking of right now.
Sure.
But I'm going to go ahead and bring this one up. So, bringing up that a lot of elected officials and the American people generally, 2 years ago, were not even thinking about Iran as being a major threat to the U.S. Now here it is. So, what issues do you think 2 years or 3 years from now are going to be major threats to the United States?
Yeah.
And if you're elected, then, how would you create a policy to, either minimize the threats or take advantage of the opportunities available?
Yeah, I think technology is going to lead the way for this because there's so much active innovation in technology right now that it is impossible for anyone to keep up. And so what we need to do is make sure that everyone understands what's going along the way for that kind of stuff. Now, for just in general, I like to do something different about how I make my bills, right? So the digital information privacy is what I think I'm going to work on first because I think it's kind of the big thing that no one's actually talking about up there. And digital information privacy is basically, do we own our data online? So any of the social medias and how they're selling it. And so we need to figure out how to stop that because America is really far behind in Europe for it. But the problem is a lot of people don't understand what it is at all, right? So education is a big thing about that and telling them why it's important that we own our own data. Now, me personally, I understand it. So I'm great for that kind of thing. But the problem is making legislation about it. And so I'm actually opening up that process as well. So this is actually using a different civil tech called Polis, POL.is, on a legislative workshop, which is on my website right now, which is danwilliamsforcongress.com. So people can actually tell me their ideas about digital information privacy. And how Polis works is you break down the bigger topic into smaller seed comments, where people can just agree, disagree, or pass. Easy, right? But they're seed comments ranging from far right to far left. And so everyone should find something that is in there that they would agree with or disagree with. And what Polis does is it starts grouping people together and shows where we actually have commonality and where we disagree. And how we can use that when making legislation is we're going to make sure that we make the legislation where a majority of people already agree with the bill before we ever take it to DC. Because I don't want people just to vote on the final bill. I want people to have input along the way. And so that's going to be important for me to kind of make sure that more people are involved in this process.
It's really an idea of the legislator as a conduit
Yeah.
instead of an author, I
So
guess, is
I always tell
maybe the best
people,
way of putting it.
yeah, that my voice isn't going to be up in DC. I plan on being a megaphone to make sure that our voices in District
Hmm.
11 are heard up there directly. And so I think it takes kind of a different kind of person to do this as well, because I am prepared to vote against what I believe in because I don't think it'll happen, right? And I also think that my opinion is the same as yours and should have the same weight because why should one person have all of this power? And it just never makes sense to me. And so my plan of attack is to change a representative to be a representative, right? Which sounds weird, but before we're not really representing our people. We're nominating one person and they're voting however they want. I want to actually represent people, which is going to be the bigger change of that. And we're going to kind of shift it from like making those decisions to informing our people. So that's why I believe that representatives should be more educators so we can understand the government through our representatives. And that's kind of the key thing right there for it.
I mean, I think we're going to wrap up here soon, but just one last thing from my end is you're talking about all of this, and this is all well and good, and it's a direction that I definitely broadly agree with. But I think an obstacle that we haven't really talked about yet is the role of money in the political process in America and how it really is a barrier for what you're talking about, because a lot of people will go, well, that's great if I'm just taking the opinions of people who are using the platform, not necessarily everyone in the district, just the people on the platform, and I'm translating that into policy. I'm going to lose funding. I'm going to lose my money for reelection.
Yep.
And in Congress, that's a very serious thing because most congressional candidates are reliant on people coming in with money. And whether those interests are legitimate or not, it's a totally different conversation. But how you personally obviously feel very strongly about this, but how would you sell this model to either other legislatures or people who want to become congressmen, congresswomen, representatives?
Yeah, you have to go the grassroots route because right now I don't take any PAC money whatsoever, and I won't
Hmm.
because of one simple fact that they can't buy my vote. That's really what it comes down to because my vote is not my own. My vote is my people's. So I can never guarantee something. So think about it this way. Lobbyists work because they have to convince one representative to get 800,000 of us to go along with it. This flips it on its ear. So they would have to convince 800,000 people to vote one way in order to get my vote. And so they don't have any kind of benefit for giving me any kind of money for my campaign for it. So my whole campaign right now is either self-funded or just small dollar donations from the people that believe in the idea. And you have to be comfortable with that because even trying to get endorsements, they don't endorse you because you can never guarantee that you're going to vote their way. But the
Hmm.
companies or platforms that understand that are the ones that will endorse you. For example, American People's Compact. When I told them what I
Hmm.
was doing, they're like, 100%, we need more people like this. And so then they gave me their endorsement, right? But even the LGBT caucus of Florida didn't give me their endorsement, even though I'm a member of that. And I have been a GLAAD award nominated person. They still said no because they're scared about it, because they think that they're a minority and they are worried about legislation against them. But I keep pointing back to the different surveys and research backed that equality for all is a shared common belief. And people need to make sure that we know that. And going up until this point, we haven't felt like that because of our representatives vote however they want. And that's not indicative of what people in America actually want. And so I want to make sure people
Hmm.
kind of get back to that sort of thing. But I would agree, it is going to be a hard thing to run like this. And yep, I have probably made less than $5,000 every single time, every single quarter. And I'm okay with it because personally, I have a lot of different
Hmm.
skills and a lot of pieces or big chunks that a lot of other people that are running have to pay for, like their website or video or audio or graphics. I have background and I can do that for free. And so a lot of those big chunks kind of go away. Now, if people are thinking about running this and they are interested in kind of using the same platform, then I'll be more than willing to help them out as well. But what I would suggest is getting people or volunteers in your team that know that they're not going to be paid upfront. And then if they believe in the project, then they will volunteer their time to make those websites, the videos, the different graphics. And if we're on the same page, and my plan of attack for ultimately is to prove that this works, right? And once we prove that it works, then I would love it to spread to other districts and other states. And then I'm going to keep Ramon busy because I think that we're going to have other little people popping up doing the same thing. And in general, in Congress, there's usually that swing minority in the center that either goes with the Democrats or with the Republicans on the different bills. And that is the people that make those final decisions. And just picture it if we had many people that were listening to our actual people in the center that could swing to actually make sure America's voice is heard on every single bill. And that's my ultimate goal.
It's a hell of a goal.
It is.
When
It
it
is.
swings, I swing way too big. I'll just tell you now. I always
Swing
tell
for the
people,
fences.
yeah, I am the way that I am.
Swinging for the fences.
Yeah, because I had really supportive parents that told me you can do anything that you want, and I took them up on it. And so now that's the problem. If you have really supportive parents, you can think you can do anything. And so
I think that though, I think it's actually, if Dan is successful and gets into Congress, and then, this is a Congress that one vote can be the difference maker in a piece of legislation. And if we were voting on the Iran War Powers resolution, and it's down to the people of Florida 11 cast the tie-breaking vote as a direct democracy, everybody else in the country would be saying, well, wait a minute, why do they have that power and I don't?
Yep.
I think it becomes a snowball effect where people start to demand that same level of accountability and same level of access, because you sort of pierce the veil once for people, and they realize, oh wait, it doesn't have to be this terrible all the time. we actually could have a better system.
Yep.
I think that's all you need. You got to have somebody who can go first, and he's got to convince Democratic primary voters, which is no small task, as he's pointed out.
No.
And he's got to do it without money because none of the PACs will fund him. So it's not a trivial thing. But
we're making it happen.
But he can, hey.
Keep going.
Yeah,
And best of luck.
Yeah, seriously, it's again, glad you had really supportive parents. I'm glad that ball's rolling. Again, I think so much of what we talk about on the pod, so much of what we talked about previously with Ramon, is just getting these ideas out there and getting people talking about it, where, as you say, piercing the veil somewhat and going, well, we need at least to be having this conversation where someone's going, it doesn't really have to be this way.
Yeah.
People have gotten used to it.
Different. Yeah.
People have gotten comfortable with it even.
Yeah.
But that's not really how it has to be, and that's not how it has to be going forward. And again, best of luck going forward, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
I would love that. Thanks for having us on. I really appreciate your time.
Awesome.
And final message, if you are in District 11 or you are in Florida, get out there and vote on Tuesday.
And you can check out more about me at danwilliamsforcongress.com.
And Digital Democracy Project, Ramon?
Yes, you can find us at digitaldemocracyproject.org. We are a nonprofit, all volunteers. So if you are good with Python, or you like to write code, or if you're good at tracking legislation, or if you're good as an organizer or connected to a bunch of civic organizations, or if you can write big checks, we need all of those things to help us to make this possible.
I can give you one of those publisher clearinghouse checks, Ramon.
There you go.
One of those big fake checks.
Exactly.
It might bounce.
Too, and smile.
Might be a bouncy check, but it'll be a big one.
We'll put it on the wall.
It'll be a good photo op no matter what.
Anyways, thank you so much. Thank you. Well, we're not quite there yet. I have to thank you for listening to On the Fringe. I have to request that people like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoyed this, please leave us a comment, leave us a rating, and we appreciate our On the Fringe community. Dave, I do know what time it is.
What time is it, Gavin?
Button time.
This always happens.
Just hit the button.